bunker at FOB Harith. The desert night pressed like a hand over the mouth of forward operating base Harith. Hot even in darkness, the wind unable to decide whether to blow or merely think about it. The guard bunker squatted at the far edge of the HESCO wall, a low rectangle of poured concrete, sandbags, and corrugated roof, its slits watching a skin of dunes that rose and fell like the backs of sleeping animals. Inside, 3 men and a red lens flashlight. Specialist Knox sat with his back to the sandbagged corner, boots braced, rifle across his lap. He was the one who never slept through the boring parts, the one who kept a little blue bead on his dog tags because an interpreter had once pressed it into his palm and said, "For the eye." He had a face that could look suspicious at a sunrise. Sergeant Morales stood half in, half out of the firing slit, elbows on the ledge, binoculars loose around his neck. He was built like a locker you couldn't dent, a little older than the others on his 3rd deployment, grayer around the edges even in a desert where everything bleached. He had the patience of a man who'd been bored enough times to learn that boredom kept you alive. Private First Class Denny sprawled on an ammo crate, long legs a tangle, sunflower seeds in one hand, and a deck of sticky cards in the other. He talked because the quiet made him itch. He had a laugh that sounded like he was asking permission to laugh. The generator behind the bunker hummed steadily, a bee that never landed. A line of other bunkers dotted the perimeter like stitches. Somewhere far behind them, a small mosque in the village carved out the hours with the call to prayer, a sound that had become as normal as the cough of a diesel. "Bet you a rip it this is the deadest shift all month," Denny said, dealing himself solitaire and losing, dealing again. "Gonna tell my kids I fought the Great Card War." "You don't have kids," Morales said without looking. "Future kids. I gotta build my legend." "Legend's not built in a bunker," Knox said. He had a wary half-smile, the kind you kept in your pocket with your lighter. "It's built by not doing anything stupid." Denny flicked a seed shell toward the doorway, missed the bucket, and pretended he hadn't. "So, story time. Morale talk. Which would you rather be, home or in a place with no email where your phone is a brick and nobody can ask you to come to a barbecue?" "Home," Morales said. "Home," Knox echoed. "You guys are killing me," Denny said. "You know what I miss? Rain. Like real rain. The kind that makes everything dark and loud. This place rains dust." The radio crackled. Static breathed in, something like syllables breathed out and died. Morales keyed the handset. "Harith Perimeter 3. Radio check." "Harith talk. Solid copy." A voice replied, flat and bored. "Status green." "Green," Morales said. "We got a new moon and 1,000 stars." And Denny's mouth. "Roger," the voice said. "Stay vertical." The night bent over them. The wind thought again and passed. It was Knox who saw the figure first. He had been doing what he always did, scanning the dunes, letting his eyes relax so they could pick up what was wrong. Everything had a pattern. Dunes were a pattern. The night had a pattern. If something moved that didn't fit, it would tug at the corner of your eye. At first, it was just a stitch in the black fabric, a white thread where no white should be. He blinked, and it thickened, teasing the shape of a man's robe. "Sergeant," Knox said, not making it urgent. "Check left of the patch of scrub. 10 o'clock. Morales brought the binos up. Sand, low thorn bushes like clots, the suggestion of a figure far, a shepherd, a villager looking for a lost goat. "Could be somebody," he said. "Could be nothing." We wait. Denny shuffled his cards again, then stopped, like he could feel a draft shift where there shouldn't be one. We got a local? Stay on your game, Morales said. The figure was still. Too still. The fresh air chill of wrongness crawled down Knox's arms. He's not moving, Sarge. Maybe he's looking, Morales said. Maybe he's stone. Like a statue, Denny said, the idea half a joke as it left his mouth, turning to ash by the time it landed. Morales watched. He had seen men test the perimeter this way, stand too far for a warning shot, make you burn your nerves on a shape, make you doubt your eyes. The ROE was clear. No positive ID, no shot. He waited to see movement, to call the thing a person. He blinked, and the figure was closer. Not in a human way. Not the small human increments of walking. One moment it had been near the scrub. The next it was at the toe of the near dune, as if distance here were written in pencil and some bored god had rubbed his eraser over it. Sarge, Knox said. He was already on his feet without remembering standing. The barrel of his rifle lifted as if it had thoughts. Morales felt his throat go tight. He whispered a curse. He whispered a prayer. He blinked again. The figure seemed to belong to the night as much as it stood in it. White robe, thob, like a candle wick that had stopped burning just before flame. Head covered, the suggestion of a keffiyeh shadowed around a face you couldn't, wouldn't, shouldn't see. The not seeing was the point. Morales keyed the radio. TOC, Perimeter 3. Possible local at grid. He glanced at the faded map, gave the numbers. Advise. We have no movement, but proximity. Static hissed. A new sound eased into it, something like water poured down stone in a different room. Words. Arabic, maybe. Not the clean lift of the call to prayer from the village loudspeaker. Something older, as if the syllables had been dried and rehydrated badly. Say again, Morales said. Solid copy Perimeter 3. All quiet elsewhere, Talk said. The interference vanished as if ashamed of itself. You got it? Roger, Morales said. He lowered the handset. The figure stood where it stood. The night breathed, the generator hummed. A man somewhere coughed. The world continued. It was Denny who laughed, too loud in a room not big enough for it. Okay, no. No, sir. This is one of those night shift games. Some pog in S1 put a mannequin out there. You want to walk out and argue with it? Knox said. He didn't take his eyes off the slit. I volunteer you, Denny said weakly. The red flashlight flickered. It guttered as if the battery were suddenly ashamed of its job and then steadied again. The radio popped. Popped again. Quiet. The generator coughed and caught, like a smoker. All right, Morales said, voice even. We're calm. We're watching. We're not some kind of... The whisper seeped through the bunker walls. That was the only way Knox could think it. As if the concrete and sandbags were only paper. As if sound could choose the path a spider took, in through the tiny, unconsidered gaps. A whisper that wasn't built to be heard in a human throat. Words that took a shape his tongue remembered learning back in schoolhouse briefings. Not the muezzin's rising call, but a flattened chant. The kind men recited to keep fear company in dark places. The hairs on his neck lifted, as if trying to listen. Denny stopped breathing. Morales didn't. He made himself breathe, long and slow, like a diver, like a man with control. Interpreter Hadi told me once, Knox said very quietly, because the whisper might be listening too. Some places you hear old prayers. Places that don't like to be disturbed. Places, Morales said, don't have feelings. Knox touched the blue bead on his dog tags. He had the sudden urge to take it off, to press it to the slit like a window charm. He didn't. Denny swallowed. We should use the loudspeaker. You know? The phrase. The one that means stop and don't come closer. Do it, Morales said. Denny fumbled for the microphone. His voice wobbled in the desert. Waqif! La takrab. Stop. Don't come closer. The Arabic sounded like he'd learned it in a stairwell between classes. The figure seemed to tilt its head, but that implied a neck. A decision. It was closer. Again, Morales said. Denny did it again. The whisper continued. The words degraded. The vowels fell apart and slopped back together at the wrong angles. The red light failed. It didn't such much go out as regret every moment it had been on. The bunker cupped a darkness you could drink. Denny cussed under his breath. Knox's fingers found his NVGs like they had been there all his life. He clicked them down. The world turned grain green. Visual, Knox said. He stopped. There was breathing in the bunker that didn't belong to them. He turned, slow, stupid, as if he could move in small enough increments to avoid creating ripples that might disturb something that wanted to be disturbed. In the corner where the ammo crates were stacked, a shape crouched. It had the size of a man who had been put on a rack and then shrugged off his bindings anyway. It was robed in something that drank green and gave back darker green. It was not the figure from the dunes. It was not anything. Knox's brain offered 1,000 things to call it. Intruder, insurgent, mannequin in the wrong place, trick. None of them made sense. It made more sense to call it a space where the rules lapsed. He raised his rifle. Somewhere on the other side of the dark, Morales whispered, "Easy." Denny made the sound of a man trying to pull himself inside his own bones. The thing's head turned. There was a face, but it wouldn't stay still. It tried on others the way a politician tries on sympathies. An old villager, a boy with a gap in his teeth, Morales' dead brother, mouth opening like he had something to tell him that couldn't be heard. Knox's mother. Knox's mother, but wrong, as if her cheeks had been painted by a child who had only a fist of dirt and a wet thumb. The chanting layered under the breathing and used the breaths like steps. Knox felt the words in the marrow and understood none of them. "Sarge," he said. The rifle was steady because all of him had come up through hours on a range and nights of tired practice. "Sarge, on me," Morales said. His night vision goggles had bitten green out of the dark, too. He could see the barrel of his own rifle and where he wanted it to go. He wanted to speak the name of God the way Hadi had once taught him to, not because he had to, but because Hadi had said it made men brave. "On me," Morales said again, and he fired. Muzzle flashes carved the room into a stop-motion nightmare. Denny screamed, whether at the shots or the thing or the way the concrete turned each blast into a punch. Knox's shots stitched the corner. Morales fired a controlled pair. Denny, too late and too loud, emptied his magazine like he could stitch the world back into a shape he liked. The firing stopped because the firing was gone. Smoke sat thick in their mouths, gunpowder as a flavor, ears singing like struck kettles. The corner was empty. The crates were wood again. Morales tasted blood where he'd bitten his lip. "Check yourself," he said hoarsely. "Everybody good?" Knox's NVGs showed his hands shaking. He forced them still. "Up." Denny sounded like he'd been running in dream water. I think so." Morales turned the red light back on out of habit. It stayed dead. "Lights are down," he said, stating a thing so true it felt safe. The generator coughed again. Caught. Died. The bee lay on its side. The bunker, which had always held a murmur of machines underneath its silence, went to a silence that was not natural. The whisper had room to grow. "TOC, Perimeter 3, Morales said into the radio. "We've lost power at the bunker. Possible contact inside our position. We fired. Send dash dash." Static whooped in, rolled back, and another voice flowed over it. Not the board staff sergeant, not any known voice. The syllables slid, dug their heels in, slid again. A language, then not. Something old rubbing at a new surface. Morales let go of the transmit switch like it burned. He had been a man who didn't scare easy. Fear was useful. It made you small and careful. This wasn't useful. This was a weight on his chest, like sleep paralysis with eyes open. "Okay," he said. The word felt too loud. "We hold. We wait for relief. We don't." Knox gagged. He had a second to think. Stupidly, "I'm going to throw up on my boots." And then he doubled over and vomited up black sand. It rattled on the concrete. It kept coming past the point where it had anything to do with his body. The sound it made was a tiny river in a place where rivers had forgotten when to be. "Jesus," Denny said, helpless. He reached to touch Knox's shoulder. Thought better of it. Touched anyway. Knox wiped his mouth with the back of his glove and laughed without meaning to, a dry bark that came from somewhere else. "It touched me," he said softly. "Nothing touched you," Morales said, and knew he was wrong the way you know your own middle name. Knox spat grit. There was a taste underneath it, like pennies. "Interpreter Hattie said this too," he said, dazed. He said, "Some corners are thin. Not bad, just thin, like the world forgot to pull all the way together." "Yeah," Denny whispered. "What did he say to do about it?" "Wash." Prey Knox looked at his hands like he could see his bones through his skin. "Leave it alone." The whisper shifted. It thinned as if coming from farther away and nearer at once. A new thread braided through it. A human voice, a man's voice, old or tired, speaking words that felt like armor. Not in the bunker. Outside. Somewhere to their left. Denny's head jerked up. "You hear that?" Morales breathed out slowly. He did hear it. He had heard Hadi pray before they went on patrol sometimes, the old interpreter hunching beside the MRAP, lips moving gently, water poured over stone that made the stone sweeter. This wasn't Hadi, but the cadence made Morales' spine unknot half an inch. "Friendly?" Denny said, hungry. "Negative," Morales said. "Nobody's out there. Everyone's racked." "Maybe a village elder," Denny said. "Maybe they're praying for us," Knox murmured. Not sure why the idea made his eyes sting. The whisper around the prayer grew irritated like a fly bumped by a finger. Morales brought his rifle back to the slit. The figure was gone from where it had been. He couldn't say he was glad. Absence here felt worse than presence. The dunes lay like backs. The village was a darker shadow against dark. The little mosque's minaret poked the sky, the speaker a dull square. The prayer outside continued, firm, not loud. It was the voice of a man who had done this every day for more days than Morales had been a soldier. It felt like sand settled after a gust. The whisper in the bunker hissed. The black sand on the floor ticked as if something tiny moved through it with purpose. Denny set the radio down gently, like it could break louder if you touched it wrong. He put his palms together and, to Morales' surprise, began to pray. A clumsy, wandering thing that had pieces of Virginia Sunday school in it and a few Arabic words he had learned to yell at traffic stops. "God, I don't know what this is. We don't mean to be. Whatever we are." Help us. In your, name." The whisper fell to a simmer. Knox breathed like a man who had run a long way and found water. Morales didn't pray, but he didn't not pray either. He stood between his men and the slit and remembered the perforated metal sound of rain back home. "Time?" Knox asked. Denny checked his watch, then shook it, then hit it against his wrist. Weird. Still 03:16. It was 03:16 like 3 minutes ago. "Batteries," Morales said. "Generator," Denny said. 03:16, Knox said like a man tasting a word for poison. They held until they couldn't measure the holding. The prayer outside finished, or it didn't. The whisper decided the bunker didn't interest it enough to keep its whole self there. The black sand on the floor lay still, fine as ash. Denny's cards were on the floor in a fan as if something had dealt one last bad hand to nobody. "All right," Morales said at last. "We're not waiting for whatever that was to change its mind." He went to the bunker door. The metal bar was cold against his palm, colder than anything in the desert should be. He lifted it, half expecting it to protest. It lifted. The door swung. The night outside was wrong. It was the same and not. The dunes were in their places, but the FOB behind them, in that first stunned heartbeat before his eyes remembered to lie, had no lights. The T-walls were there, but they had a different weight. The weight of something that had been there for a long time and had decided to become a hill. The outlines of motor pool and chow hall and chapel squatted in the dark as though a giant hand had pressed them deeper into the earth. The air had a dry, sweet smell he didn't know. The sound was wrong. No generator. No distant music from a barracks. No cough. The world had been wrapped in wool. "Back," Morales said, and his voice was small. "We close. We dash. Knox stepped forward. He didn't know he had until he felt the bunker's shadow leave him. The open air hit his face like a hand. "Don't," Denny said sharply, surprising himself. Knox lifted a hand to say he heard. From the dunes, shapes lifted their heads. Dozens, white robes like the first figure. But where the first had been a fact you doubted, these were facts you didn't want. They did not advance. They arranged themselves the way stones arrange themselves when a river falls and leaves them to dry in a shape that feels like a sentence. Morales had just enough of the army left in him to want to give an order. He said, "Weapons up," and then remembered the empty hollowness of his magazine. He could have lied to himself and forgotten. But men who lie to themselves at the wrong time don't come home. He brought the rifle up anyway. It felt better to hold it. Knox did the same. Denny wanted to run. He brought his rifle up instead and hated how quickly it made him feel safer. The shapes in the dunes watched. The wind changed its mind, then changed it back. "Waqif," Denny called hoarsely. "La Takrab." One of the figures at the front tilted its head. The suggestion of a face turned toward him. For the first time since he'd seen them, Denny felt the faint, insultingly faint, comfort of the thought. These are people. He clutched it like a child clutches a toy before sleep. "Maybe they're..." he began. The figure's face slipped. It didn't move or change. It slipped, like someone had taken hold of it from the inside and adjusted it a hair to the left. Features tugged and then snapped back, leaving the human arrangement behind like a coat on a chair. Denny choked on his next word. Knox swallowed sand he hadn't taken into his mouth. A new sound rode up out of the dark behind the line of white. Hollow, wooden, like something wrapped once on a board and then again, slower. It ran along the figure's line and became a message his body recognized before his brain. "It is not for you to be here." Morales stepped back. "Inside," he said, and he might as well have been telling them to go to bed. We lock it. We dash. Look, Knox said, and he was looking at the sand in front of the bunker, at the footprint he had made when he stepped out. It was filling in, not the way wind fills a print, worry by worry. It filled as if memory had poured back into the ground and his presence had only been an interruption. He looked up. The white-robed figures were nearer, not by walking, by decision. They stood now almost within the range of cheap night vision, featureless faces where a man's would have been. And yet, if you looked with the skin of your forearms, you could tell each had an expression: pity, anger, hunger, grief, held in the angle of a shoulder, the tilt of a throatless head. Morales didn't like the feeling. Not that they meant harm, but that he had walked into someone else's room and sat down hard on a bed and only now realized a family had been sleeping under the quilt. Inside, he said again. He couldn't say close the door because it felt like a lie. It felt like a child holding a sheet over his head and deciding that was a wall. They stepped back. The bunker was suddenly too bright for being pitch black. The door came in. The bar dropped. Denny slid to the floor and let the cold concrete suck the heat out of his spine. He wanted to cry, and he wanted to laugh, and he knew that either would open his mouth too wide, and the whisper would crawl in. Knox stood, hands dangling at his sides, like a man who had been told to keep them where the cop could see them. He had been touched, he was sure now, not in his body, but in the part of him that remembered songs. He could feel fingerprints there, a hot, cold tingle, like he'd put his soul on ice and then held it near a candle. Morales set his rifle down and leaned his forehead against the wall. He spoke softly, in Spanish first, then English, half to his men, half to a god who had found him in foxholes before and might find him again if he was still interested. Listen, he said after a while. We're going to sit. We're going to breathe. We're going to count 5 in, hold, 5 out. We're going to do it until we believe we're doing it. They did. The whisper thinned and thickened. The black sand found the cracks and filled them. Time hung its watch on a nail and forgot to come back for it. At some point, he would later decide it had been a moment and an hour. Knox took off his helmet. The straps had begun to feel like someone else's hands. He turned it over in his lap and stared. He thought of the bead on his tags, of Hadi telling him on a bright morning outside the wire about places where old things were content and men made them discontented by building too loud. He thought, we built a generator on a grave. He didn't know if it was true. He felt it in his teeth. Denny closed his eyes. He saw his father's garage the way the afternoon light came through the dirty window. He saw a girl's face under a neon sign the summer before basic. He saw nothing. The nothing had color. It's telling us to leave, he said, so small they almost didn't hear. Morales thought of the orders taped to the wall in the talk, the map of their sector, the paper with the names of the men on his shift and their blood types and the number of days until they rotated out. He thought of the little mosque with the square speaker and the man whose voice had been easy water. He thought of how often he had stood between his men and something stupid, and how rarely he had stood between them and something impossible. We'll leave when we're relieved, he said, and it was the best sentence he had. The whisper in the walls sighed, like a house that has decided the people in it cannot be helped. At 03:16, which had been the time for a very long time, the door creaked. They hadn't touched it. They knew the sound of their own hands on their own door. This was not that sound. This was the sound you get when doors are a courtesy. Knox lifted his head. He had the sense that if he stood now, he would stand into something. He did it anyway because what else was there to do? The door opened. The white-robed figures stood in a crescent around the mouth of the bunker. Their presence pushed the air ahead of them. The temperature had dropped 2 degrees in the kind of way you knew without a thermometer. They did not step in. They didn't need to. Denny wanted to break every rule and whoop for help and shoot into the ground and run. He kept his hands on his knees like a man with a new tattoo he doesn't want to ruin. Knox took 1 step forward. He was gentle with it, like you carry a sleeping child. He stopped when he felt the world change viscosity. A figure at the center of the crescent leaned forward, just enough to make a shadow where a shadow had nothing to do with it. Its face was a suggestion. It wore suggestion like a mask.
Oh, leave.
Leave, the whisper said. And this time it was a word he could swear was a word. The word had been wrapped in other words, old ones. It came to him through those wrappers. It might have been pity. It might have been an instruction. Morales said, "We can't." And that felt like standing up in a church and saying something true but unwelcome. The figure leaned back. Its not face shifted. Not a change, not a movement. The desert held its breath at last. Knox looked down at his helmet. He had been holding it. He did not remember turning it upside down. He watched, calmly, seriously, as black sand began to pour into it from nowhere, from air, from the seam between worlds, from the space in his head where a song used to sit. It filled the helmet, went still, settled itself like a creature in a bowl. "Okay," Knox said, as if someone had asked him a question he had finally understood. He set the helmet carefully on the crate and smiled the way a man smiles when he realizes the thing he has to do will hurt and that the hurt is correct. "Knox," Denny said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Boy young." Knox stepped forward again, into the changed air, into the crescent. He did not touch them. They did not touch him. He passed through a line that felt like walking through smoke that had learned to resist. He went out among the dunes. "Knox!" Denny screamed, and the scream hit the figures and fell like a bird against glass. Morales took 2 strides and stopped. He would put his body in front of bullets. He had long ago decided that was his job. He didn't know how to put his body in front of an idea. Knox walked. The white robes watched him like the sea watches a buoy. He didn't look back. He did not need to. He could feel his friends in the bunker the way you can feel a tooth with your tongue after it has been pulled. He walked until the first light took a breath under the horizon. The figures thinned. The dunes got their own shape back. He walked into the place where the earth had remembered it was earth, and men had remembered they were small on it. When Morales could move again, he moved wrong. He went to the doorway and leaned out into a dawn that had decided to happen. "Knox!" he called, and the call went up and came down like a parachute and then collapsed. There was no one on the sand. The helmet on the crate behind him held its black cargo like a joke that hadn't been funny when it was told, and would be funny later to the wrong person. The relief came when relief always came, at the fraction between one shift and another when men were used to waking and angry about it. The generator shrugged itself into life again at some point before that, surprised to find itself still loved. The FOB returned to itself the way a man sobers up and decides which parts of the night before he will keep. The door swung open. 2 soldiers in fresh sweat broke off a complaint when they saw Morales and Denny. The bunker smelled of smoke and something sweet and animal, the way the air over a summer field sometimes smells of ruin. Morales and Denny sat side by side, rifles in their laps, eyes wide as if someone had pulled them open and told them to hold them that way until further notice. They looked alive. They looked like you could knock on their foreheads and hear a basement. "Where's Knox?" one of the relief said, and then didn't ask again because Denny's head turned toward him in a slow arc and stopped where it knew to stop and didn't do anything else at all. Men ran. Men with badges you carry in your pocket that say you know things came. The talk wanted a statement and got silence. The chaplain came and sat with them and prayed in a voice that flowed gently and didn't demand immediate understanding from the listener. A medic shone a light in Denny's eyes and said something that meant he will either come back or he will not, and I can't tell you which from here in a way that sounded like kindness. Someone picked up Knox's helmet. Sand whispered against plastic. The medic who did it later swore the grains moved in patterns like ants. He kept that to himself for 3 beers, and then couldn't anymore. They searched the perimeter. Footprints made sense, and then didn't. The night had eaten what it wanted and had been dainty about it. The little mosque in the village sang the day awake, and no one there knew anything about white-robed men on dunes. An old man, when asked in the careful way soldiers have been taught to ask, only shook his head and said in Arabic that there were places you walked around, out of respect, the way you walked around a sleeping dog. Hadi, the interpreter, came and sat on an ammo crate in the doorway of the bunker and looked at the sand Knox had put down and the way the bunker felt bigger than it should. He touched his thumb to the bead on Knox's tags, which Morales had looped over the crate without thinking. He said a prayer. Not the kind you sing, the kind you tuck under your own tongue when you have to walk past a graveyard on a short night. "I told you," he said to Morales, not unkindly. "Some corners are thin." Morales nodded. He had not slept. He felt there were new lines in his face. "What is correct to do?" "Close your eyes to it," Hadi said. "Walk around it, or make a gift, water, light, a good thing." "We can't move the bunker," Morales said. Hadi looked out at the line of bunkers like teeth. "Then be gentle, and don't be too proud." They built a low ring of stones at the edge of the berm and filled a jerry can with clear water and poured it there, a small, stupid kindness. The chaplain stood with them and said something that was not an exorcism and was not nothing. The village imam walked out the next evening at twilight and stood at a distance and recited a verse like the steady hand of a man shelling peas. Men joked later that the FOB had received a joint blessing. Men who had been in the bunker didn't joke. For a while, nothing happened. The generator behaved, the whisper didn't. Denny talked again, mostly at night when he could pretend the answers were small. He didn't talk about the sound, he talked about rain. He said he could feel it in his teeth. Morales did his shift, and then another. He kept his men vertical. He wrote Knox's name on a form he hated, in a box made for names. He went to the village with Hadi and bought dates from a man whose fingers were stained with sugar. And once, unexpectedly, he stood in the little mosque on the cool floor while Hadi spoke to someone inside. And the ease of it put a thing in his chest he had not known he wanted. The sand in Knox's helmet settled. When Morales finally turned it over, much later, and let the sand pour back into the desert, it flowed like something that had decided to be generous, a soft hiss that might have been words if you were the sort of man who liked to chase that kind of trouble. He didn't. He thought of Knox walking away, of the white line of figures breaking like shorebirds and then reassembling, and he let the last of the black fall and tapped the helmet twice, the way men do when they put a thing down and mean it. On a night a month after the night, when the wind remembered how to be a wind and the generator had a new belt and Denny's laugh had learned to ask permission again, Morales took first watch alone. He stood with his elbows on the slit and watched the dunes and listened to the not bored radio and the bored stars. Far off, at the edge of the near dune, a figure stood. Morales did not lift the binnows. He didn't call it in. He stood very still and felt the old fear rise, a faithful dog, and he held its head in both hands and spoke softly to it and told it the thing fear had never believed. "I see you, and I am not moving." The figure did not come closer. The wind moved. The night changed shifts. From the village, a voice rose and fell. Human, ordinary, kind. Morales let it wash the bunker like water over stone. He thought of Knox walking into a place that had asked him to return something no one could name. He did not know if that was a good story. He knew it was not the worst one. He stood his watch. He breathed 5 in, held 5 out. He thought of rain. He could almost smell it. When the relief came, he nodded to the young sergeant taking his place and said nothing special, because what he had to say had nothing to do with rules and everything to do with walking around certain corners, with the small gifts men can make for things they don't understand. Outside, the desert waited, unoffended, older than every war and every prayer and every bunker, able to hold 1,000 stories without picking a favorite. In the little mosque, a man's voice rose and fell again, and someone in the barracks swore and pulled a pillow over his head, and a boy in the village rolled over and dreamed of a green place with the sound of rain. In the bunker at FOB Harith, for the first time in a long time, the red lens flashlight worked when someone touched the switch. The beam fell on the ammo crates, on the map, on the hook where a helmet ought to hang, and then, for no reason anyone could say, the beam wandered to the stone ring at the berm and the wet place in its center where the last pour of water had made a dark mark, and it rested there until the man holding it, not sure why, lowered it and let the dark be the dark again.
I follow you into the dark valley. Is it all a dream? I lay me down to sleep, and I follow you. And I follow you, follow you. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Is it all a dream? And I follow you, and I follow